Welcome back. Another question has come in, and I think this question was asked probably just as I was answering the previous question. And it says, if I was to have my VPN from on-premise to Azure and place a DC in Azure, am I maybe better using the DC in Azure for federation? And yeah, you kind of are, but of course, if you've got a DC in Azure, then you might as well just domain join your applications directly. It's only when you don't want to. Some people would see it as a risk to have their internal network directly connected to an Azure network. They may say, you know, we've done a security assessment and we say that there's too much risk associated with that. We want no direct connection between the two environments. That's where federation comes in as a nicety. Where you can't do that, or sorry, where you can't do the, sorry, where you want to have a direct connection, then you might as well actually just domain join the application, and then you don't have to do federation. Although you can if you want to. It's just, you know, you could take advantage of all the features which are there in Active Directory to just domain join an application in any case. So let's just go back and have a look at that. Back here. So the question was, if I was to have my VPN from on-premises to Azure, so let's draw that in. Here's my VPN from on-premises to Azure. So that would include all of this infrastructure here. And place a DC in Azure. So let's put a domain controller here. So this is the question I answered earlier, basically. I think it must have just come in as I was answering it, or maybe just as I was answering it. If I was to have my VPN from on-premise to Azure and place a DC in Azure, am I maybe better using the DC in Azure for federation? So the federation component is that other bit that I told you about, ADFS. ADFS. And I'd set up a federation trust between this and Azure AD. Yeah, and you know, then I really wouldn't need that one there then. But of course, you know, the whole thing is I wouldn't even need this or this, because I could just domain join that. Just go through the process of making that into a domain joined machine, and then I would just use that as a domain joined machine. Even if I had users coming in from, you know, let's imagine this is the internet out here, and this is my line of business application, and I've got a file, I've got a load balancer here, all inside the Windows Azure. Let's draw this inside the Windows Azure network. This is Windows Azure here. Even if that load balancer is right inside the Windows Azure network and that machine is connected to it, when the user comes in here through the load balancer and hits this thing, if they're not on a domain joined machine, they're going to get the Windows credentials prompt. You know, it's going to pop up and it's going to ask for username and password. And I think, does it say Windows security in that box at the top? Something like that, doesn't it? But you know what I'm talking about. So, you know, even if they were outside of the on-premises network, that's what would happen. Now, if this machine happened to be in here, then when they go to that application, all the Kerberos stuff will happen, and they'll actually be prompted for their credentials. Well, they won't be prompted for credentials because there'd be a domain joined machine, and so they'll have logged in the morning when they did Control-Alt-Delete, username, password. Okay, hopefully that answered that one. Now, I was about to move on to the next slide before we had that break, and I just realized I don't want to talk about virtual machine availability. I want to see how our deployment is getting on. So let's go back and have a look at it. So I've got my TechDays 12 machine and my TechDays 12 VM machine, which is now running. So what can I do with that? I could now connect that to an existing endpoint. So if I click here, go into endpoints, and add an endpoint, I can now, it says load balance traffic on an existing endpoint. So if I do this and then select HTTP port 80. Now let me just cancel all that again. If I go back to the first, sorry, not that one. If I go back to this virtual machine and look at its endpoints, it's got an endpoint called HTTP port, and it's on port 80. That's its public port. So if I now go back to this virtual machine, endpoints, add an endpoint, I can say load balance traffic on an existing endpoint. So I've already got HTTP port 80 connected up to the load balancer. So now I say, of all the connections that are on my load balancer, I want you to treat these two as if they are just load balancing between those two. And I say, OK. HTTP port, private port 80. OK, so it says that the port is now load balanced. So if I find another port on some other machine called HTTP port, and it's also on port 80, and it's load balanced. Let's go back here. HTTP port 80, says load balanced. No, that's because it's in the process of updating it. Probably if I refresh, it will say that it is load balanced. Not yet. It will do, though. It will do. So one of the things that I could do then is I could connect to these machines. Let's go to that one. And a couple of things I just want to point out here. If I go to this one, I'll go to the remote desktop. Or I go to that machine. Connect. Right, what I'm going to do is install IIS onto this machine. I think this is the first time I've connected to this one, isn't it? I've already got a connection open somewhere, haven't I? Is that the one? There we go, right. So this is my TechDays UK VM. This is the first one I created. I did it earlier, didn't I? Let's go to roles, add roles. So let's add the IIS web server. Don't really need the app server, I don't think. I think I want all of this stuff. I'll put ASP.NET on there. But I don't even think I need that. I think that's enough. Okay, so while that one's installing, let's go back to the second one I just connected to. No, that's the magnifier. This one here, it's still preparing. Oh no. So this is TechDays UK VM. Roles, add roles. Web server. Put ASP.NET on there. I think that'll be enough. Right, if I now go back to that first machine, which is this one, hasn't quite installed it yet. But let's just have a brief look at that configuration. I've got two machines. They've both got a port called HTTP port. Its external port, so its internet-facing port, is port 80. Its internal-facing port is port 80 on both machines. That means when a request comes in from the internet on port 80, it will hit the load balancer, and the load balancer will send the first request to the first machine and the second request to the second machine, and the next request to the first machine and the next request to the second machine. So in theory, what the load balancer will do is it will load balance 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. It will just keep doing that until ad infinitum. So if I put a web server on each of those machines and I make something to identify the machine, so in the web page for that first web machine, if I say this is VM1, and in the web page for the second machine I say this is VM2, then I should be able to see the web page delivered to the web browser come from two different web servers. So let's see, that seems to have done that. So what I should be able to do now, just to check this, is go to Internet Explorer, and I'll go to localhost and see that IIS is actually running. When Internet Explorer fires up, I'm sure. Oh, the other thing I need to do is remove ESC, isn't it? IE ESC. So I'll remove that. I'll close that down and fire it up again. It should fire up more quickly. Yep, it's not enabled. So if I go to right, so there's IIS running. Now if I go into IIS Manager, drill down into this, and go to the content view. There's a file there called iisstart.htm. So if I explore, where's the explore button gone? The explore button's gone. Okay, I know where it is in the file system anyway. If I go into the local disk, inetpub, www.root, and I edit that page, open with Notepad. Where's my head, body, container? I think it's in there. So if I put in here VM1 and then save that away, or just save it. Let's have a look what happens now when we refresh this. So it says VM1 down here. So I know that I've definitely got this coming from virtual machine number 1. Okay, so that is my TechDays UK VM is VM1. Let's close that down. Let's go to TechDays. Is it that one there? TechDays. Oh, which one is which? There's this one here, look. So it's installed IIS. Let's do exactly the same thing. Let's go and remove Internet Explorer security configuration. Let's drill into the file system the same. Let's edit this file. And in there, let's put VM2 and save that away. So if I go to localhost on this machine, I should see VM2. Oops. And there's VM2. Okay, so we definitely know that we've got IIS running. We definitely know that when we connect to the first machine, we get VM1. We connect to the second machine, we get VM2. Let's go back and look at the configuration in the portal. So in my portal here, I have got TechDays 12 VM1, an endpoint which is load balanced. TechDays 12, another endpoint which is load balanced. It's updated the load balancing endpoint now. So now if I go to the URL for that machine, and notice they've both got the same URL because I connected them to the same service. So if I copy and paste that and put it into a new tab, I should get the same thing. So I get VM1. So now let me just do Control F5, VM1, VM2, VM2. I'll just keep doing this, VM1, VM2. So you can see I'm just hitting the button here, and you can see I'm doing it quicker than the page is refreshing. But you can see I'm load balancing. So in order to connect something up to a load balancer, I need both of the machines to be on the same network, which means to say I have to say connect to existing virtual machine. And then I connect two endpoints, connect the first one up to the load balancer, or I just say, you know, I just say create an endpoint at port 80, and I connect the second one up, and that connects to port 80. Now, the other thing I just want to show you about the way this works is in the portal, if we go back to those machines, go back to endpoints, notice that it says the remote desktop is on port 58097 on the public port. This is the internet connected port, and it's 3389 on the private port. If I go to this machine, it's 3389 and 3389, and that's because this machine was the first one to be created, and so its port 3389 was automatically mapped all the way through to the internet, to the public internet, as port 3389. And that's how I connected to it. When I said I want to connect, it created the RDP file for me, and it said :3389. When I connected to the second one, it created the RDP file for me, and it said :58097. So just think what the load balancer does here. What it does is the load balancer sees a request coming into its single IP address, addressed to port 3389, and it routes it to the first VM. It routes it to IP address, whatever it is, port 3389. If it sees a request coming into port 58097, then it maps that onto the second IP address of the other virtual machine and port 3389. So it goes to a different virtual machine. And that's how it is I'm able to RDP into a machine, or into a number of machines which only have one public IP-facing internet address. Okay, let's now, what else? There was something else that we were doing with a virtual machine. Oh, that was the domain controller. I've actually done that demo. Sorry, and the other thing that we were doing, I was, before I came here to do this presentation, I was trying to do a demo of the Windows Azure Active Directory Graph API. I did a demo of using the tools for it. My actual demo application is broken. So what I've got to show you now is a video of the program manager from it, Stuart Kwan, doing that demo. So this is a fairly short thing. It's probably about a 4-minute demo, I think, a 4-minute video. So let me just show you that.
The first thing I'm going to do is sign in as, let's see. And so does anybody know what this page does? Has anybody here studied claims-based identity already? Claims-based identity? I have a claims-based identity chalk talk tomorrow, if you don't know what that is. It's, yes, home realm discovery. Where am I from? This application is relatively primitive in the sense that it lists all the companies that have signed up for the application. And the company that I have here is called Stu's Bicycles. So I want to sign in from Stu's Bicycles. There's different ways of doing home realm discovery. I'm not going to go into that right now, because this way is a little bit clunky. It lets you see all of the people who have enrolled in this application, all the organizations, but let's ignore that for now. I'm going to log in at Stu's Bicycles. This takes me to the Azure Active Directory logon page, which today is, during this developer preview that I'm showing, is branded as Office 365. And you're going to have to just sort of ignore that for now. It's not the Office 365 logon page. It's the Windows Azure Active Directory login page. And I'm going to log in as Eric, who's an employee at the company. And when I log in, we're going to find out some things about Eric. Ignore this debug stuff, although we can look at it later if you're interested. This is the contents of the login token that arrived from Windows Azure Active Directory. It's really just there for debug purposes, and it's going to go away in a couple of days when we reprop this application. But the application can see that Eric is a sales associate, read that out of Windows Azure Active Directory, knows that he works in the mountain biking division. When he goes to, we go to look at the expense reports, he's already prepared an expense report, not submitted it yet. So let's go ahead and submit that expense report. The application can look into the directory and know that Mike Manager is Eric Employee's manager, so it's going to submit it there. I got a great airfare. So we'll submit that for approval. Again, these things would be really hard if you couldn't just look inside the directory and see this information. Now I'm going to sign out. Now unfortunately we don't support sign out yet in this preview, so I'm going to have to close the browser. I'm going to open another in private one because I want to make sure I have nice clean cookies. And I'm going to sign in again. This time, I'm not going to sign in as Mike Manager yet. Mike Manager actually doesn't have access to this application. If I were to try to log in as him, in fact, well, let's just do it for fun. That's not what I want. Okay. When I try to log in, we're going to discover that, he's not authorized to use the application yet. Let's log in as the administrator and give Mike Manager access. Sign in. Let's use bicycles. The administrator's name is admin. And the reason why the admin is going to be able to log in, got to use complex password, because this is live on the internet. If I was using, pass @word1 bang, then you'd all know and you'd be logging in and destroying my application, but you're not going to do that because I'm not telling you what the password is. So here I've logged in as the administrator, and I'm going to add some users to the application. You can see Eric Employee is the only person who has access. Now, with a cloud application, again, if I want to do something as simple as pick from a list of users, it's really hard to do that with a cloud application today unless you've uploaded the whole list of possible users into the application. But because the expense reporting application can see into the directory, you can see that, there's 2 other users that could be possible to add. And let's add Mike Manager and give him access to the application. Great. Now, the admin has access because the expense tracking application can actually go look in the directory and see that admin is a tenant admin in Windows Azure Active Directory. So it knows that no matter whatever the initial state of the application was, let the tenant admin come in and do things in the app. Let me log out again. And just to prove that this really works, we'll sign in as Mike. And after we've signed in as Mike, we're going to see, look, it knows Mike. It can see his job title. He can see also works in mountain biking. And if we go to see the expense reports to approve, there's the one from Eric Employee. So it's very simple. All of the code for this application is available on GitHub. If you want to see what's going on, what kind of queries we're doing against the graph to find out the information about the users. If you want to see how sign-in worked, you can see how that works. This happens to be an MVC application. It's using a .NET extension of Windows Identity Foundation for the single sign-on part, but we also have samples for Java. We have samples for PHP that support the protocols used by Azure Active Directory so that you could do this on any platform, well, at least those 2 platforms, at least to start.
The sort of the graph API and so on. In the little break there, we got another question which came in. And the question was, does the load balancer stop balancing traffic to a VM if it's powered off, or does it keep trying regardless of state? And no, so this is one of the advantages of Windows Azure, is that it's monitoring all the things that are going on, so that if you've got a VM which fails, then it detects that failure has occurred. There's a thing called the heartbeat, and it when you deploy a VM to Windows Azure, it does put some extra stuff on there for you. And there's a heartbeat which is in communication with a thing called the Fabric, which is the software that runs the entire data center. So it detects that the heartbeat is gone. It then removes, as far as the configuration database is concerned, it removes that VM from the configuration. It then informs the load balancer, and the load balancer then stops routing traffic to that machine. Of course, it might take a little while for that to happen. I don't know how long that is, 30 seconds or so, some amount of time before it recognizes that the failure is concerned has occurred, but it doesn't just continuously route traffic to a machine which has not got any capacity to answer it. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so how funny we should talk about a virtual machine which is powered off or no longer available. In fact, sorry, one thing I should just say is if you go through the process of removing a virtual machine from the configuration, then actually what happens is, although you might do it in the portal or you might do it through the REST API, the REST API calls a Service Management API, and the Service Management API then coordinates all the activities that need to happen. So one of the things it will do before it deletes it off the host is it will disconnect it from the load balancer, update the load balancer's configuration to say that this machine should no longer have traffic routed to it, and then it will take it off the host. So in a really clean scenario, all you do is you just delete the VM, or you just stop the VM, and everything is automatically taken care of. It's the failure scenario that might take a few, I don't know how long it would take, but it might take some time for the fabric to recognize that a failure has occurred and to then take corrective action on the load balancer. But you should have to do nothing for this to happen. Okay, so now let's talk about virtual machine availability. In terms of service level agreements, so what are the agreements that Microsoft gives? Microsoft does not give agreements for the performance of Windows Azure. So you don't get any, like we guarantee a certain bytes per second performance or instructions per second or anything like that. But we do give service level agreements. We do say that the service will be available for 99.95% of the time for any service that has multiple roles in it. So let me just go back to the portal and show you what I mean by that. In this portal here, I've got two. We know that those two machines are connected into the same network because when I created them, I went through that process, didn't I? I went new, virtual machine from gallery, server 2008 R2 SP1. I gave it a name. I gave it a password. I got to this point here. And I said connect to an existing virtual machine, and I picked a machine which was already running. So we know that the machines are together. Go back here. Sorry. Go back here. So if I look in this area here called Cloud Services, we'll see that I appear to have a cloud service which is called TechDays UK VM. And if I look at the instances in that, there are two virtual machines in that cloud service. So whenever I connect virtual machines together, what I'm really saying is I'm not connecting this machine to this machine, I'm connecting them both to the same network. And whenever they're in the same network, they're in the same service. And if I have at least two machines in a service, then I get a 99.95% uptime guarantee, which means that I can suffer 4 hours and 38 minutes of downtime per year of unplanned downtime. Let's go back to the slide. So 99.95% for multiple role instances, 4.38 hours of downtime per year. Whereas if I only have a single role in a service, then it's 99.9% of uptime availability. So that gives me 8 3/4 hours of downtime per year. And there's a list there of what's included. So compute hardware failures, data center failures, hardware upgrades. There may be circumstances in which we need to inform you that there will need to be some downtime on your instance. We won't take the entire service down, we'll just take down that instance. So as long as you've got two servers in a service, then we could take one of them offline, do some work on it, maybe, I don't know, like a service pack installation or something like, I don't know what it is, but some serious amount of work that needs to be done, which may take up to 25 minutes, bring it into the configuration again, and then take another one out of the configuration. But we don't include VM crashes that are caused by third-party software or guest OS updates. So if you're in the middle of doing something to your machine and it causes it to blue screen, then that is not part of your uptime guarantee. So for example, you put a piece of kernel mode code on your machine that causes it to crash, that's not in the uptime guarantee. So the guarantee is for things which are covered by the platform itself, the Windows Azure platform. Now, in order to try and meet these things, we have the idea of fault and update domains. So here I've got a couple of roles. I've got a web role, so this is a web front end, and that's got 1, 2, 3, 4 instances, 4 virtual machines. We call them instances. And I've got a worker role. This is a back-end service which is going to do some processing, and that's got 4 instances. So the way that these would be deployed would be something like this. I could have 2 instances in one rack, and 2 instances in another rack of the web role. And I could have 2 instances of one worker role on one rack and the other 2 instances on a different rack.
And that would mean if one rack was to fail, my service would still work. Its performance would be reduced, but the service wouldn't disappear. It would still be running, because all these things would be connected up to each other and connected up to the load balancer, and I wouldn't lose the service of any major components. So we call those domains for keeping something running fault domains. Now, it looks there as though, by default, we'd end up with 2 instances in the same rack. There's no guarantee of that. We might end up with all 4 instances for the web role spread across 4 racks. That gives us even greater isolation. But the idea of a fault domain is anything which is common to the instances in the service will be distributed. So, for example, if there's a battery backup unit, a power supply, even flood zones and those sorts of things, routers which are common between all of these things. So if we had the failure of a single router will not take out my entire service. The failure of a single battery backup unit in the case of a power failure will not take out the entire service. The failure of a single power supply will not take out the entire service, because it will be spread across racks which are distributed across these elements. Okay. So in virtual machines, we have this idea of availability sets. And when we do, operating system updates and things like that, this is what we have. Is we have the idea of, let's imagine that I put my 2 IIS machines, the ones that I've just created, let's imagine I put them into a single availability set. And let's imagine I had a couple of other SQL servers and I put those into an availability set. Then what happens is they get deployed in this way. So one availability set guarantees that the machines are across things which can fail. So in this case, we've drawn it very simply with racks, but those racks would be on different power supplies, different battery backup units, different flood zones, different routers, etc. There'd be nothing common between those 2 bits of infrastructure. The same with the SQL servers as well. And clearly, those fault domains are spread across my availability set as well. So I said earlier on, when I was creating virtual machines and I was doing demos in the portal, I was saying, there's an availability set there, but I'm not going to bother with creating one. You could put one machine into an availability set, but obviously there's nothing for it to be available with. So you need at least 2 machines in an availability set to get any effective use out of it, for it to distribute the provisioning of the machine across different bits of infrastructure. Okay, why is that not moving on? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is a bit of a review. Was there a question there? Okay. Question from Dan. Thanks, Dan. If you delete the VM to prevent being charged, do you also have to delete the storage? Okay, so Roger's asked that question. If you delete the VM to prevent being charged, do you also have to delete the storage? No, you don't. Deleting the VM doesn't delete the storage where it's kept while it's not being used. So we have the idea of storage, blobs. So your file, your VHD file, whether you brought that yourself from Hyper-V in your own on-premises environment, or whether you brought it from by creating a VM in the portal, the way I did, it goes into storage. And then when you deploy that machine, so when you go create virtual machine and you pick that disk, it will pick a machine somewhere and it will deploy it. Sorry, it will pick a host somewhere and it will deploy it onto that rack. If you say delete virtual machine, the stuff which is in storage is still there. So let me just go back, show you what I mean. So if I go into storage here and I show you, these are the various places I've got my VMs stored. If I go into containers, thanks, Dan. Oh, sorry, did you have a question on there as well?
Just one.
Oh, that was it?
We responded.
Okay. And if I go in here, you can see these are all the VHDs. This is a mixture of operating system and data drive. So I've got a drive F and a drive G VHD there. One of those has got a SQL database on it, and one of them's got SQL logs on it. That's an operating system. It's got SQL on it, and you can see the rest of these VHDs. So these are all in storage. Now, the way that I can surface these is if we take srv 2012-SQL SRV 2012-SQL, you know, and dates and so on. If I go into virtual machines here, and I say new virtual machine, and I go compute virtual machine from gallery, and I pick my disks. I think that one was at the bottom somewhere. SRV 2012, oh, it's in here somewhere. I'm sure I saw it. Oh, it might be because I've actually already got it deployed, I think. No, not that one. But that's a bad example because I've actually already got it deployed. In fact, it's already, let me show it's already deployed. It's that one there, SRV 2012 SQL. So that's actually running a SharePoint infrastructure that I've got deployed into the cloud already. Let me pick a different one. Let me go new virtual machine from the gallery, my disks. So these are all the disks that I've got in storage. Let's pick one. Oh, in fact, there's that OL TechDays one that I deleted earlier. VS 2010 host -VS 2010 host. So if I now come out of that, go back into my storage, we'll find that file somewhere. Right, is it in this one? Let's find out. Containers, VHDs. No, it's not in that one. Let's go back here. Try this one. Containers. Doesn't look as though it's in that one. Started with VS 2012, didn't it? So let's try the third one. Containers. Oh, I can't find that one either. Maybe it's in one of the ones that I created. Is it in that one? No, I can't find it. I'm sure I'm just word blind here, but the point is that the files themselves exist in storage, and they get those files get deployed to a rack where the modifications take place to the file system, and then when I delete them, they get deleted out of this out of here, and those changes get written back to the blob. So you don't lose your disk when you deploy something. Okay, so I'm going to do a. Sorry, I was on the review slide, but before I do the review, the thing that I want to do is talk about SharePoint in the cloud. So I've got a SharePoint infrastructure here which is deployed, and let me show it to you. This SharePoint infrastructure consists of an Active Directory domain controller. So that's I created that domain controller onto a virtual network called the demo VNet, and that exists purely within Windows Azure. I didn't connect it to any external infrastructure just simply because I don't have a $5,000 Cisco device. I've also got a SQL server, so that is the configuration database for the SharePoint server, and I've also got a SharePoint server. Where's it gone? SRV 2012 SPVM1. Now, what you notice about all of these three machines, that one, and that one, is that they're all at the same URL, srv 2012-shpt.cloudapp.net. So that's server 2012 SharePoint.cloudapp.net. So I should be able to just copy and paste that and go to the SharePoint site and see it running. And it's just got the default SharePoint team site on it. Oh, all right. It would normally have the default. For some reason, it can't. That's the error you get when the SharePoint server, with SharePoint, all the content is in the database, and the SharePoint server gets its incoming internet request, and then it goes to the database to get the content. And so something's gone wrong there. I'm probably not going to troubleshoot that now. But the idea is that you deploy your Active Directory domain controller, you then deploy your SQL server, and you domain join it to the domain controller, and there's two ways of doing that. You can either go into the portal and just go, join to domain, Or you can, when you deploy your service, your server, you can use a PowerShell script, and that script will run, and you can specify in that script what domain you want to join to. And the advantage of doing that is as it boots up, it's automatically joined to the domain. You don't have to do a reboot on join. And then you deploy the SharePoint servers, and you can deploy like a farm of servers if you wanted to, because all you need to do is connect those SharePoint servers through an endpoint configuration up to the load balancer, and you know that the load balancer is going to load balance across the SharePoint servers. Okay, that's a real big shame that that didn't fire up. Let's just do a refresh and just see if it does work. No, it doesn't work. Okay. And I should point out that all of the software, all of the virtual machine software is in preview at the moment, which is why various things have gone wrong as we've gone through here, because while we're in preview, you know, there's no guarantees on anything. Everything's not at production quality yet. We're not quite sure when we'll actually be releasing the final product, because there's so much feedback on, not just on the performance and stuff like that, but on the usability and how the portal is configured, and you know, what better user journeys you could have through the portal. Right, so let's hit the slides again. Final slide, the review slide. So this is your last chance to get any questions in, because I'm just going to do a review now. So if you get any questions into Dan, he'll probably run them down to this room here, and we'll answer them. But we talked about the public cloud landscape. And do you remember what we talked about was the difference between an on-premises environment, an IaaS environment, a PaaS environment, and a SaaS environment? The advantage of IaaS is that you can pick something up from your Hyper-V environment, copy the VHD across, and dump it into Windows Azure. As long as that thing that you've got running doesn't require any of the infrastructure that surrounds it, like Active Directory or specific firewall configurations or specific application services which are in your on-premises environment, then that's a really simple move to do. Quite often you might want to do a little bit of engineering. You probably want to do some testing, make sure that it's going to work and give the performance that you want. But the advantage of IaaS is that migrations are fast. The disadvantage of IaaS is that a lot of the management that you did in your own data center, you still have to do it in the new data center. You do get rid of some of it though. You don't do any of the hardware. You know, everything from the virtualization platform downwards, you don't do that anymore. So you don't have to look after cables and power supplies and routers and all that kind of, you know, key sort of hardware infrastructure. Then we talked about PaaS, and the advantage of PaaS is that all you do is, as a developer, you write your application, you package it up, you create your service model, which is the XML representation of the architecture, you know, that sort of whiteboard diagram. You send it to Microsoft and you say, can you run that for me? And as you saw, it took less than 10 minutes to build that, was 10 server infrastructure, the Planketronic CRM cloud.net application. And then so that's the advantage, but the disadvantage, of course, is that you have to write your application specifically to run on that platform. So a migration is not just to simply pick something up, move it across and drop it. It's pick the code up, modify the code to run in that new environment, and then deploy it to that new environment. So that's obviously going to take longer than just doing a straightforward migration. But whether you're migrating or developing for the platform, there is an answer for both of those scenarios. We also talked about SaaS, and that's where the entire application is delivered over the internet to the user, like Office 365, for example. Then talked about Windows Azure virtual machines. And remember, what we have is a range of virtual machines that are available. Actually, the one thing I didn't show you was the other Windows machines that are available. So if I say new compute virtual machine from Gallery, we've got BizTalk Server CTP. That's just a you know, community technology preview trial. So you can use BizTalk Server in that method for free at the moment. There's a ready created SQL Server. There's Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1, August and July editions, Server 2012, and then four flavors of Linux. And then I've got all my virtual machines here, and I've got some images that I created myself, a SharePoint base image and a sysprept image that I've already got. You can create your own images if you want to. All you need is a machine that is currently not running, and you use the capture button to capture it. So all these are running at the moment, but you see this button down here which says capture. If I was to switch that machine off or shut it down, I could then capture, and that would be captured as an image, and it would appear as an image in my image library.
Whoops, where's my slides gone? And remember with virtual machines that if you connect one virtual machine to another virtual machine, you're not literally connecting them together, you're connecting both of them to the same network, and that then means that you can connect them both to the same load balancer. Virtual machines live in a data center, and there are 8 data centers around the world. We've got 1 in Dublin, 1 in Amsterdam. There are 4 in the US, basically north, south, east, and west. And there are 2 in Asia, Southeast Asia and East Asia. When you deploy something to the cloud, you specify what data center you want to go into, or you can create what's called an affinity group, and that targets a particular data center. The other thing about virtual machines is that they are different to Azure Cloud Services in that you are responsible for looking after them because they're an IaaS service. So if a patch comes out for Windows, it's up to you to patch that machine. Something you have to be aware of, the service management you have to do. Allied to virtual machines in IaaS is the virtual networks feature, and that allows you to connect either your on-premises network to a Windows Azure network, or you can have a completely standalone Windows Azure virtual network. And the advantage of doing that is that you can put your own DNS infrastructure into that, which means that you can run Active Directory in that infrastructure. Remember, when you're using a virtual network, or indeed any network, the types of addresses you get are DHCP, there isn't any. It's called dynamic IP addresses, DIPs, and that's where the lease lasts forever. Actually, it lasts for 168 years, but we can consider that to be forever as far as we're concerned. That we also have, we have DIPs, we have virtual IP addresses, which is the single IP address that connects that. You know, I said if you connect one virtual machine to another one, they go onto the same network. Well, then they connect to a load balancer, and that load balancer connects to a firewall, and the firewall connects to the internet. That single IP address and that DNS address are the virtual IP address that gets you connected to the internet. There's only one of them per service. You could have 1,000 VMs in that service, and you only have one IP address to connect to the internet with. We then talked about Windows Azure and Active Directory, and remember the things about Active Directory are that your domain controller will appear to have a DHCP address. It's not actually a DHCP address, it's a DIP address, but as far as the machine is concerned, the virtual machine is concerned, you say, yes, I want to run my DNS server on a machine which appears to have a DHCP address. And I showed you that in the video, and I kind of put that little box up there to say, ignore this advice which says, don't do this, because you have to do it in Windows Azure. The other thing was make sure that you put your DIT, your directory information tree from Windows Azure, onto a data drive. Don't put it onto an operating system drive, because you could very quickly end up with, in the case of a blue screen or something like that, you could end up with a directory which starts to get corrupted. So don't do that. And then we talked about SharePoint in the cloud, and that really consists of creating a virtual network, putting in a domain controller into that network, so following all those guidelines I just talked about, domain joining a SQL Azure instance, domain joining the SharePoint instances, and then connecting the SharePoint instances up to the load balancer. Unfortunately, we had a problem with the SQL connection in the demo that I had, but I mean, it's just basically a team site that runs. Okay, we're 10 minutes early. Are there any other questions come through, Dan? No? Okay, well, that's it then. We're done. Thanks very much for listening, and hope you enjoyed all this. Oh, no. I forgot to tell you the next steps. So what can you do now that you've sat through this whole afternoon of Windows Azure? What can you do? We have 2 programs that run in the UK for Windows Azure. One of them is called 6 Steps to Windows Azure, and that's for if you've already decided that you're going to do something with Windows Azure, then it's an 18-week program divided into 6 steps. So it goes, there's a first week, and then there's a 2-week gap. Then there's week 2, 2-week gap. Week 3, a 2-week gap. Week 4, and so on for 18 weeks. And it's basically a hand-holding process. It allows you to come along, to try things out, to learn things through these sessions, and then you get a 2-week gap to go away and implement something that you've learned. And we also have online surgery, so you can come with your questions either about the stuff which was covered in the previous session, stuff that you've learned in that 2-week gap, or stuff from a previous session.
We also have Azure Developer and IT Pro camps. So if you go to that link, bit.ly/Azure UK, you will find 2 pages there, one for the Azure camps, which are one-day free events, hands-on. If you're an IT pro, you need to bring a wireless-enabled laptop with good connectivity, and there's a very, very small setup that you do, which involves copying some Windows PowerShell commandlets to your machine. If you're a developer, there's a substantial bit of setup to do, but you probably already have most of it. Like, for example, you have to install Visual Studio, you have to install the Windows Azure SDK, you have to install SQL, and there's some certain other configuration that you have to do. If you're a developer, probably the only thing you need to install is the Windows Azure SDK, because if you're a developer, you probably have the rest of it on your machine already. But they're one-day events. We get between, depending on the venue, you know, sometimes we get 30 people, sometimes 70 people, and there are a collection of us, and it's a series of sort of lecture lab, lecture lab, lecture lab. And you turn up with a Windows Azure subscription, and you just do labs, and you walk away. In the IT Pro one, you walk away with a SharePoint farm deployed into Windows Azure, and in the developer one, you walk away having written an application that will run in a Windows Azure PaaS environment. There's also the Windows Azure Training Kit, and if you go to that link, although it says Windows Azure Training Kit, WATK, Windows Azure Training Kit org 12, it will always take you actually to the latest version of the training kit, which currently is the October version of the training kit. It's got some new labs in it. There are about 40 labs that you can do, and I guess about half of them are for the developer and half of them are for the IT pro. There's my blog, Plankytronics, bit.ly/Plankytronics with 2 X's, and I blog mostly about Windows Azure. I blog about other stuff as well, but it's nearly always about Windows Azure. You can also get Windows Azure for free. You don't have to pay for this stuff. You can get it free for 90 days as a trial subscription, and if you go to that link there, bit.ly/Azure for free, it's numeral 4, Azure for free, then you can try something for 90 days. And it allows you to have 750 hours per month of a small instance for compute, something, I can't remember how much storage, but enough storage and enough database and enough transactions and so on to get you through so that you don't have to pay anything to use the system. Great, thanks very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you on a camp. If you do come on a camp, come up to me and tell me that you came on a camp as a result of coming on this day. It'd be nice to hear about that. Thanks, and thanks for your time.